Welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday on Al Arabiya English. I'm Melinda Nusafora. Coming up on the show, Saudi Arabia and France are leading fresh efforts towards a two-state solution between Israel and Palestine. Meanwhile, over in Scotland, President Trump has hosted the UK Prime Minister at his Turnberry Golf Resort. The setting may be serene, although the agenda is anything but, with the humanitarian crisis in Gaza topping the list. And in sport, England's Lionesses make history with another European title. What it means for women's football, coming up. We start today with a focus on the Middle East. Will a two-state solution ever be reached? Ministers from all over the world are convening at the United Nations to work towards this goal. The meeting was originally scheduled for June, but was postponed after Israel's attack on Iran. Now, the effort to revive talks for a two-state solution between Israel and the Palestinians is underway once again, with Saudi Arabia and France leading the diplomatic push. However, doubts still remain, especially with both the United States and Israel boycotting the event. For more on this, I'm joined by French Senator Nathalie Goulet. Nathalie, thank you so much for joining us here on Global News Today. First of all, let's start with sort of some practical, real-world outcomes. Ideally, what do you think can be achieved at this two-day meeting?
You know that the President Macron plan with Her Royal Highness Mohammed bin Salman to recognize Palestine on June 18. Unfortunately, the war between the United States, Israel and Iran happened, and then we had to postpone this recognition. So I think it's a first step, and probably not the only one. I think that President Macron wants to bring with him other European countries.
I'm going to come to that actually in a minute, because that's definitely one of the goals that they've highlighted for this meeting. But before we get to that, when this meeting was originally scheduled in June, it was at head of state level. However, this rescheduled gathering is at a ministerial level. Is that downgrading a worrying sign? Is it an ominous indication that perhaps this isn't the right time?
Well, you know, this subject is difficult enough, has been on the table for such a long time, that I think that whatever is a level, it's already a sign. I mean, it's a strong will from the President Macron, and I think that we have not to take too many discussion about the level. I think that the step is very, very important, whatever is the level.
What do you think is going to be the toughest agenda item during this two-day meeting? Israel has all but written off a two-state solution. So how hard is it going to be to get it back on the table?
Well, it will be very difficult, but you know, recognition is a unilateral decision from a country. Israel has nothing to do with that. I mean, unless the Prime Minister bomb again Tehran or Washington, if he doesn't agree. But if nothing happened in the meantime, recognition is unilateral decision from a state, and I think that nobody will interfere. We have discussion in the French society, and the politicians are divided into two blocks, against and in favor. But the parliament has even nothing to say. I mean, it's a decision from the president.
So if we use France as an example, that there are two blocks, some for, some against, why do you think the French president decided that this was the right time for recognition? I'm
tempted to tell you, ask him. But as I'm with you, you know that it was one of the preconization of the report that we had 3 months ago on the dangerosity of the Muslim Brotherhood. And the expert on this subject thought that it would be a good idea to recognize Palestine, to reduce the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood in the country. So that may be one thing. The other thing is probably the situation in Gaza, which is absolutely unbearable. So I think that are the main reason, and the president wants to be the first and lead probably other European country to the recognition.
The US has been particularly scathing in its assessment of this meeting and has even suggested it could jeopardise the prospect of a long-term peaceful resolution to the conflict. What do you say to that sort of criticism?
Well, it's more than criticism. I mean, President Trump said President Macron was saying nothing and has absolutely no decision and is not decision maker anywhere, and doesn't matter what the President Macron is saying. So it's more than criticism. But I think that United States of America are exactly in their role at the opposite. United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia are supporting this position. So we have to go and try to find a middle way. But this situation cannot stay for long. I mean, it's over. We reach the point of no return.
You say that, and when we were talking about what some of the toughest agenda items might be, if the US is critical of these moves, it has been critical of France. France probably feels like it has a stronger position on the world stage to weather that sort of criticism from the US. Do you think other countries could be deterred when they see such vehement opposition from the world's biggest superpower?
Yeah, sure, of course. But at the same time, you are talking about the tougher point. I think that we have many questions. We have the hostages. We have the Hamas in Gaza. We have several issues right now. Election also, because recognition of a state will bring sooner or later, and I hope soon, elections that Palestinians didn't have any election for the last 18 or 19 years, even more, I don't remember. So you see, we have some technical question too, but recognition is mainly a political issue and a political decision of the French president. So we will see with the parliament in September how the Minister of Foreign Affairs and how the president will answer to the society. As I told you, there is a very strong debate right now.
What is the general sense within the French community since he's made this announcement? Give our international audience a bit of a sense of how it's been received.
Well, I mean, I told you the society is divided into two. A lot of people are very happy, and a lot of people are also saying that it's not the right time at all, that is giving more advantage to Hamas, which what happened, that the question of hostages are not in the balance, and that this recognition is given for nothing in exchange. So it's a breach of a balance. But again, recognition is a unilateral decision from the president.
Israel has also put forward the argument that recognition is a reward for Hamas. And I note that in some of the technical language with regards to the topics being discussed at this meeting, one of them is the disarmament of Hamas and forcing them to relinquish control over the Gaza Strip. How is that going to come to pass? That seems like something that the international community is once again could be criticised for interfering in the affairs of another people.
Well, I mean, with Palestine, it's exactly what everybody has been done for the last 60 years. Award the Hamas, it's exactly the word that I was looking for, and I didn't find it, but you're absolutely right. It's exactly the feeling that a lot of people have, that you have to be violent, you have to kidnap, you have to rape, you have to kill children and babies, and then you get your state. It's exactly the situation that the people are also thinking on the other way.
So how do you think a meeting like this can counter that argument?
I don't see the way to bring the two positions back to one. I think that if the president keep in mind this recognition, we even have no vote in the parliament. It's also the way to have an international position that maybe will not get in the international affairs when the session will be back, and the budget and the deficit and all the troubles that the French society are right now. Maybe you want to lead something very important, which is this recognition of Palestine, to have this international position and be himself recognized as a leader in this field.
Often when we see world leaders, make these controversial, sort of quite controversial pronouncements on the global stage that this has been interpreted as, they can be accused of trying to distract from what you have described, troubles at home, domestic troubles in society. Do you think that is something that is weighing on people's minds in France?
Yes, probably yes. But it's a very common behavior from the politician to try to escape some national difficulties by having an international action. It's so natural, I say. So yes, I think that the people are thinking. But right now, most part of the population, including a part of the Jewish people in France, are totally disoriented and they criticize also the situation in Gaza, making the people starve, and the endless war, and at the same time stay 10 or 20 hostages alive, and this situation is not solved. But the situation, as we see it in Gaza, is just unbearable. I mean, it's just unbearable for everybody.
If we turn our attentions back to New York, to this meeting, this two-day meeting that's underway, the French Foreign Minister has said that he will use this conference to call for other countries to join France and to recognise a Palestinian state. Do you think, is there confidence from the French Foreign Minister, from the French political elite, that other countries will heed that call? Because we've seen a little bit of scepticism from the UK, from Germany. Is it going to be a hard call to get people to heed?
I think it's probably the work that the Minister of Foreign Affairs will have during summer, a kind of crusade and bring people together. But you know that United Nations is more than 186 nations, and it's one country, one vote. So I think that a lot of people will be in favor. In the parliament, we already voted, some years ago. Mm. In the parliament, we voted 5 or 6 years ago recognition of Palestine, but it doesn't. It has no effect.
That brings me actually to my next question. Already, almost 75% of UN member states recognise Palestine as a state, and yet that hasn't made any difference to the lives of Palestinians in those contested territories. So will France's or any other country's recognition that may come out of this two-day meeting make any difference to the lives of Palestinians without having Israel and the US on side?
You are absolutely right. You are dramatically right, and you are tragically right. These things doesn't change anything to the Palestinian life. What may change the Palestinian life is get rid out of the Hamas, rid out of the Muslim Brotherhood, and get back to a normal life, and election, and of course. But again, I think it's a very strong signal. And politically, right now, I think that the Palestinian people need some strong sign of support. Maybe it will not change anything, but probably it will change the views that they may have for European countries who are getting to let them die without reaction.
That takes me to my final point. You say that this is a strong signal. So even if perhaps nothing tangible, nothing on the ground changes after this two-day meeting at ministerial level in New York, what kind of signal do you think it sends to the US, to Israel, and to the people in the contested territories?
Well, I think that the most important is the people in the territories. They will see that France are supporting the constitution and the solution and the two-state solution. What will bring a big difference is the ceasefire, bring the hostage back, and then kick the Hamas out of Gaza, and having election too. For US and for Israel, it will probably be very difficult. As you say, the President Trump say that what President Macron is saying doesn't worth anything, has no value. And I think that the Israeli Prime Minister will qualify the French President as Antisemite. And that's it. Let's say what will happen during the next months till the United Nations meeting, and I hope that that will bring some hope in the territories and for the people who are now in such a very, very unbearable situation and so difficult.
Indeed, it is going to be an interesting time for international diplomacy. French Senator Nathalie Goulet, thank you so much for joining us here on GNT. US President Donald Trump and the UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer have met at Trump's Turnberry Golf Resort in Scotland. It's certainly not your typical diplomatic bilateral setting. The meeting has widely been described as unconventional, with an American president hosting a British Prime Minister on UK soil. On the agenda is the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, the war in Ukraine, along with wider global issues such as international trade. Sitting next to the UK PM, President Trump said the US goal was to get the children of Gaza fed.
We want to get the children fed. We made a contribution a week ago of $60 million, all going into food. We only hope the food goes to the people that need it, because so much, as you know, when you do something there, it gets taken by Hamas or somebody. And we're prepared to help. You know, we want to help. It's a terrible situation. The whole thing is terrible. It's been bad for many years, but it's great to hear you feel the same way that I do.
For more analysis, we're joined by Dr. Liam Fox, former UK International Trade Secretary, who also served as the UK Defence Secretary. Dr. Fox, thank you for joining us here on Global News tonight. Firstly, I want to talk to you about this unusual setting for this meeting. The US President choosing not to visit 10 Downing Street, but instead seeing the UK PM visiting President Trump while he's playing golf in Scotland. Do you read anything into this dynamic?
Not really. The President is coming for an official state visit in a very short time to the UK. This is much more a private visit, but I think that it's such is the importance of getting relationships right with the United States that it's worth our Prime Minister taking a short one-hour trip to Scotland and the European Union President taking a trip in the same direction.
So a little bit of a case of any good FaceTime you can get with President Trump, where he's not going to ambush you in a White House press conference, as we've seen from other world leaders, is probably a good thing.
It's probably advantageous from a comms point of view, yes.
Not many world leaders have significant sway over the US president. Do you think Sir Keir Starmer has any leverage with him? Do you think they have the kind of relationship where President Trump may listen to what the PM has to say?
Well, a lot is talked about the special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom. But that phrase, in fact, was first used by Winston Churchill, speaking in America after the war. And for him, the special relationship was really based as a wartime leader on intelligence, military sharing of the burden there. And that's still the basis of the special relationship with the United States. As a former defense secretary, I can tell you that no two countries share intelligence as closely as the United States and the United Kingdom, and that still is the basis. Of course, there is a shared cultural, historical, linguistic heritage, but it's still essentially strongly based on the military and security elements, and that always makes the United Kingdom be heard a little bit louder in Washington.
You talk about intelligence sharing, how important that relationship is, but I wonder if on a personal and a strategic level, whether you think the UK Prime Minister at the moment has a personal relationship that can allow him to maybe convince the US President, steer him in certain directions where other world leaders currently cannot.
Well, we've seen over history that you have conservative leaders in the United Kingdom getting on with democratic leaders in the United States and vice versa. And I think that's because the relationship itself is too important to be dependent on personal chemistry or indeed party political relationships. So I can think of very few occasions where there hasn't been a good relationship between the British Prime Minister and the American President out of necessity as much as anything else. Mm.
I mean, it is all important at the moment when we have so many issues on the world stage. The UK has spoken out against Israel's handling of the conflict in Gaza, for example, in quite stark terms, in contrast to the US. Do you think the PM can convince President Trump to be tougher on Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, I think that the President was talking today about how unacceptable the situation in Gaza is. And I think that most people, having seen the sort of pictures that we have, would completely agree with that. It's untenable that the situation should continue as it is. I think that the indications that Israel is considering pauses in hostilities to allow aid in shows that Israel does respond to international pressure. And I'm sure that President Trump will have that at the front of his mind. You must remember that President Trump, of his many characteristics, is very, very family orientated and will, I think, have been very much affected by the plight of some of the families that we've seen. And I think that there will be a lot being said behind the scenes.
He did say, with regard to the hostages still remaining in Gaza, he said that's a complicating factor and said that dealing with Hamas has been difficult. Do you think that we can expect a change in policy or maybe a change in tone from the US President after his meeting with the UK Prime Minister, perhaps putting a little more pressure on Israel to return to the negotiating table, to get a ceasefire back on the agenda?
Well, I think what is said in public, where I think the nuances and the tones will be very carefully considered, may not be exactly the same as what is said behind the scenes, where I think that some of the views might be expressed a little more frankly than you will get in the public domain. The important thing is not really the optics. The important thing is the outcome, and that the humanitarian suffering that we've seen in Gaza is brought to an end as quickly as possible. And it really doesn't matter, what you think the cause of that is. I think that we have forgotten too often that the beginning of this crisis began by Hamas murdering over 1,000 Israeli civilians, and that Hamas would have known what the consequences of that would have been. And I think that they've shown that they have no real regard for the well-being of the people in Gaza. But I think that the world looks at the suffering of ordinary people and says we cannot continue to be able to simply look the other way when this level of suffering is appearing on our TV screens. And we all understand the scale of just how dreadful the humanitarian crisis is.
Another of the big headlines to come out of the talks so far is the suggestion that President Trump may reduce that 50-day window he had given Russia's President Vladimir Putin to agree to a ceasefire deal with Ukraine. Do you think that that's due to significant pressure from the UK Prime Minister?
I think that there's been a lot of pressure from European leaders in general and from the European side of NATO. And I think that there is an exasperation that you cannot actually accommodate Putin. And, you know, President George W. Bush said that he looked into Putin's eyes and he saw a soul. And I think Putin looked into his and saw a KGB file number. I think we had the same sort of view coming from President Obama, who wanted a reset with Russia. And I think there's an understandable view amongst Western politicians that because they are, if you like, hardwired to find consensus, that they can do something similar with Putin. And I don't think it's possible. I think Putin is a hard ideologue who dislikes the West, who dislikes our views of rule of law and democracy and human rights. And I don't think that it's easy to do business with him. I think President Trump hoped that he would be able to do so. I think he is now being shown in no uncertain terms that you cannot do a deal with Putin. Is a man who doesn't have to worry about his domestic opinion. He doesn't need to worry about media. He is, to all intents and purposes, a tyrant and a very bloody one at that.
Do you think that Keir Starmer will, if in fact the US president does follow through with this and forces and reduces this window that he's given President Putin, do you think the UK PM will take that back home as a bit of a personal victory?
I think that everybody in the western part of NATO, the European part of NATO rather, would regard it as a positive if the United States was to bring further pressure on the Putin regime. Day after day, ordinary people in Ukraine are being killed by Russian forces, by Russian drones and Russian missiles. And for what? It's totally unclear what the Russian aim is now in Ukraine, other than to continue the war because Vladimir Putin has no alternative.
From conflicts to economy, let's focus on global trade. The US and the EU have struck a deal, both President Trump and the European Union Commission boss Ursula von der Leyen, saying that this is a big trade win, both of them framing it as a win. What's your reading of the deal? Because not everyone in Europe is convinced that this is a win for them.
I think it's probably as good as they could get in the circumstances. And I think that in terms of the European Union, President Trump was on firmer ground in terms of the tariffs than in perhaps other jurisdictions. And the reason for that is that the European Union has, for a long time now, been willing to use non-monetary tariffs. And by that, I mean non-tariff barriers and technical barriers to trade, which actually made it more difficult for the United States to penetrate European markets. And I think President Trump took the view that you're using this instrument is perfectly reasonable for me to use a counterbalancing instrument of financial tariffs. And I think that's what he's done. And I think a lot of people would think that it's not a bad outcome in both directions. And from my own experience in trade, when both sides tell you that they've both won a spectacular victory, you can probably bet that it was not bad on both sides, but not as good as either side were proclaiming. I guess that's probably where we are.
I mean, the French have come out, in particular, the French Prime Minister describing it as the EU capitulating to the US and saying that this is a dark day for the bloc. Do you think that this tariff deal, or this trade deal rather, is going to create some friction, maybe some division within the bloc?
Well, the French typically like to have it both ways, but I'm afraid that trade policy is determined entirely by the European Union, and they're part of the European Union, and they have to suck it up. One of the reasons that Britain is no longer in the European Union is we wanted control of our own trade policy. You can't have it both ways. You can't both be in the European Union to voluntarily give that control of policy over to the European Union and then complain about it when one country is less happy than some others.
Any positives that you see coming out of it for the continent? What do you think, or who do you think could be considering themselves a winner out of it?
Well, I think they could have been facing 30% tariffs, and I think that would have been extremely damaging for a lot of manufacturers in Europe selling into the United States. The German car industry is one example. But ultimately, when it comes to tariffs, nobody really wins. But as I said, the European Union can't really complain about monetary tariffs when it's been applying non-monetary tariffs for some time and using environmental legislation or consumer legislation to achieve much the same thing. All of us will benefit from liberalization in global trade, but that liberalization has to be even and it has to be fair.
Well, it has been a very interesting discussion between those two leaders indeed. Dr. Liam Fox, former UK International Trade Secretary, thank you so much for your analysis. England's female footballers are European champions once again. They lifted the trophy after a thrilling win over long-time rivals and World Cup holders Spain in a dramatic penalty shootout in Basel. The Lionesses made history as the first English team to defend a major tournament title, and their impact goes far beyond the pitch, with grassroots women's football in the UK seeing a surge in popularity. Joining me today is Dr. Carrie Dunn, author of Reign of the Lionesses, How European Glory Changed Women's Football in England. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Dunn. Before we get into the impact this team has had, give me your impressions of the game. They sure did it the hard way, didn't they?
Yeah, I think they did it the hard way all the way through the tournament, from losing that first game against France to the extra time and penalty shootout against Sweden, coming up from 2 goals down, and then the extra time, that late goal, and then, again in the final on penalties. The hard way the whole way through, but it was exciting.
Yeah, do you think, I mean, as you say, they have done it the hard way all the way through. Do you think that that is part of the reason people have really gravitated towards this team? They just seem to keep grinding it out.
Yeah, absolutely, I do. I think that people really appreciate that determination, that resilience, that refusal to give up. They never know when they're beaten, and I think that's really endearing. But also, when that's your national team, that's something that you want to really be part of, isn't it?
The great rivalry also that has developed between England and Spain, how important has that been for the game, for building that momentum, that support base, because they have this real great rivalry on the international stage?
Yeah, it's really nice to have that, particularly in Europe. Obviously, the USA have for a long time with the big players, and Japan were up there as well. But now it's kind of the European dominance is coming through. And the fact that we've got England and Spain, obviously, in the World Cup in 2023, and again this year in the Euros final, and it's all like by a single goal margin or then by penalty shootout. It's very close. So neither side are dominating. Obviously, they know each other very well as individuals on the club level as well, with plenty of them playing in the WSL or plenty of English players playing in Spain. So, yeah, it's an exciting rivalry emerging.
You mentioned the US used to dominate. Why do you think there has been a bit of a pivot to having such class players come out of Europe, come out of the UK? What has led to that shift?
I think partially it's money, to be honest. The USA dominated for so long because of the Title IX law that meant that boys and girls in educational settings had equal investment in their sporting activity. And so that meant very good college football, which meant a very good standard of football being played after college level. But now the European powers are catching up. They're investing in their talent pathway. They're investing in their domestic leagues. And now the USA are having to work to catch up.
The women's team has managed to achieve something that the UK men's team could only dream of at the moment. What impact will this have on women's football, not just in the UK, but perhaps globally as well?
Well, I think that any kind of women's football tournament or any women's sport tournament that's catching the public imagination, that's drawing big viewing figures, not just on television for the live matches, but also on social media, that's attracting that engagement, because these are very relatable, fun personalities that I think people enjoy engaging with, even if they're not sports fans. I think anything like that is going to be great for women's football, women's sport globally as well. So I'm hoping that it will attract more investment at the top level, but also that will trickle down to grassroots so that girls can enjoy playing football, not just because they want to be the next lioness, although perhaps they might be, but because they want to enjoy being part of a team the way they see the lionesses do. They want to have fun, they want to keep fit, and all the brilliant qualities that you get from being part of a team.
You mentioned investment there. Do you think there has been enough investment in women's football, in women's sport, or is this something that countries are playing catch up on now when it looks like it's a popular thing to be doing for governments?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is still a catch up there to be achieved. I think there's been a great investment. I'm not doing down anything that's been invested so far, but of course, women's sport could always do with more because, and let's face it, in England, women's football was banned for 50 years, and plenty of other football associations across the world followed in its footsteps. So if women weren't even allowed to step on football pitches, I mean, it's no wonder we've only had a professional league in the Women's Super League in England for 8 years, because before that, we were still just trying to close that gap. So if we have it that in that context, the achievement that the Lionesses have managed over the past few years is even more remarkable.
Yeah, put that into context for us. I mean, how much of an impact has that had on getting the recognition, on getting people to watch the games? I mean, when people argue that women don't deserve the same amount of money in their pay packet for being a professional athlete because more people come and turn out to the men's games, when there's been so many more decades investment in them, how do you think female athletes are dealing with that sort of argument?
Yeah, I think the pay packet and the prize money is slightly different arguments. I mean, I would probably argue that, you know, organisations like FIFA, like UEFA, like the FA can afford to put more money in the women's prize packets because they're just training just as hard, they're working just as hard, and it's a prize for an achievement. So they probably deserve equal prize money to men. The pay packets, maybe that is slightly different, and we're looking at closing that gap between the marketing and advertising and broadcast spend in the men's game. But again, perhaps we could argue that until a few years ago, there wasn't very much investment in the men's game. It wasn't until the start of the Premier League that we really saw this boom in advertising. So perhaps, you know, 30 years down the road, we might see an equivalent level of salary between the men's and the women's game.
I mean, in things like Grand Slam tennis tournaments, the prize money is the same. In other sports, it's still not. But what do you think is leading to the disparity in that prize money? I mean, the amount that the Lionesses will share in winning the Euros is paltry compared to what the UK men won just for getting into the finals.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the Lionesses aren't worrying too much about their prize money because what they wanted to achieve was winning the Euros, and they've done that. I mean, I'm sure they're kind of thinking about what they've achieved in terms of the sporting terms of it. It's for the rest of us to kind of worry about the pay packets. But yeah, I mean, the disparity is often put down to things like, you know, spectatorship in terms of broadcast figures. But we're starting to see those broadcast figures and that spectatorship rise now. This was in terms of in-person attendance, this was the biggest attended Women's Euros ever. And we shouldn't forget that previously women's Euros have been staged in very small stadia as well. When we had it in England in 2022, we had very small attendances because we had very small stadia of hosting, because the bigger clubs, the bigger stadia didn't put their hands up to host these matches a few years previously. So perhaps those errors will be rectified and we'll start to see bigger attendances and bigger broadcast figures going forward as well.
So if we look to the future, What do you see maybe for the Lionesses, but for female footballers in general? Is this momentum going to keep going? Do you think it's going to hit a bit of a plateau while they sort of settle in to some of this renewed support? Or do you think they can continue to push for a bigger slice of the pie, for the bigger slice of spectators?
I think this is absolutely the starting point. We've won €1 in 2022, back-to-back Euros now. You know, the sky is the limit. We're seeing increased interest in the domestic game as well. Obviously, the England players are also celebrities. You see them in their advertising, their sponsorship deals. So I think we can only go forward from here. I would love to see 3 in a row Euros and maybe a World Cup as well. The sky's the limit.
And just finally, what makes these Lionesses so special? Historic win for them. What is it? What is it about this team?
I think this team, as a group of individuals, obviously you got stories like Hannah Hampton, who was told she wouldn't be a professional sports person because of her eye condition. I mean, she has no depth perception. A goalkeeper with no depth perception is an amazing thing to think about. You saw Lucy Bronze come straight off the pitch and say that she'd been playing the whole tournament with a fractured tibia. I mean, that grit and resilience and determination, I think that is a very special thing. But I don't think we should forget the fact that these women are just the latest and they're just the next generation of wonderful, trailblazing, pioneering women, because women have always had to fight for the right to play football, and these women are just enjoying the benefits of all those campaigns.
I know that you were saying that you don't think that they're going to be focusing very heavily on their pay packet, but I mean, we did have the WNBA players recently pushing for a better, fairer pay deal. Do you think that in general women's sport is getting the momentum perhaps it needs to argue for these professional athletes to be rewarded as such?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, is that a lot of these female athletes, a lot of these women's sports have not been professional for very long. So it's going to be a process, but that gap is closing, and these women are becoming more and more well-known, and the rewards will follow.
Amazing. We really appreciate your time, Dr. Carrie Dunn. It's a pleasure speaking to you about this amazing historic team. Thanks so much for joining us. That is all we have time for on Global News today. Be sure to keep watching us tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. We always appreciate your viewership. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, goodbye.